The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. His own good, either physical or moral, is not sufficient warrant. If all mankind minus one were of one opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. A person may cause evil to others not only by his actions, but by his inaction, and in either case he is justly accountable to them for the injury. Although it is not true that all conservatives are stupid people, it is true that most stupid people are conservative. Liberty lies in the rights of that person whose views you find most odious. There is an imaginary circle drawn around every human being, over which no government should be able to step. There is always hope when people are forced to listen to both sides. I have learned to seek my happiness by limiting my desires, rather than in attempting to satisfy them. How can great minds be produced in a country where the test of great minds is agreeing in the opinion of small minds? War is an ugly thing, but not the ugliest of things. The decayed and degraded state of moral and patriotic feeling which thinks that nothing is worth war is much worse. To tax the larger incomes at a higher percentage than the smaller is to lay a tax on industry and economy, to impose a penalty on people for having worked harder and saved more than their neighbors. In the long run, the best proof of a good character is good actions. Genius can only breathe freely in an atmosphere of freedom. No great improvements in the lot of mankind are possible until a great change takes place in the fundamental constitution of their modes of thought. When one's ideas are not challenged, one's ability to defend them weakens. In all intellectual debates, both sides tend to be correct in what they affirm and wrong in what they deny. Bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing. Originality is the one thing which unoriginal minds cannot feel the use of. Whatever crushes individuality is despotism. To bring a child into existence without a fair prospect of being able not only to provide food for its body, but instruction and training for its mind is a moral crime, both against the unfortunate offspring and against society. The only freedom which deserves the name is that of pursuing our own good in our own way, so long as we do not attempt to deprive others of theirs or impede their efforts to obtain it. One person with a belief is equal to 99 who have only interests. There are many truths of which the full meaning cannot be realized until personal experience has brought it home. All silencing of discussion is an assumption of infallibility. The love of power and the love of liberty are in eternal antagonism. The pupil who is never required to do what he cannot do never does what he can do. To refuse a hearing to an opinion because they are sure that it is false is to assume that their certainty is the same thing as absolute certainty. All silencing of discussion is an assumption of infallibility. Every great movement must experience 3 stages: ridicule, discussion, adoption. The liberty of the individual must be thus far limited. He must not make himself a nuisance to other people. It is not because men's desires are strong that they act ill. It is because their consciences are weak. The worth of the state, in the long run, is the worth of the individuals composing it. Men do not desire to be rich, but to be richer than other men. The general tendency of things throughout the world is to render mediocrity the ascendant power among mankind. Since the state must necessarily provide subsistence for the criminal poor while undergoing punishment, not to do the same for the poor who have not offended is to give a premium on crime. The perpetual obstacle to human advancement is custom. The object of universities is not to make skillful lawyers, physicians, or engineers. It is to make capable and cultivated human beings. With equality of experience and of general faculties, a woman usually sees much more than a man of what is immediately before her. The moral influence of woman over man is almost always salutary. All good things which exist are the fruits of originality. It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. And if the fool or the pig are of a different opinion, it is because they only know their own side of the question. The most cogent reason for restricting the interference of government is the great evil of adding unnecessarily to its power. To understand one woman is not necessarily to understand any other woman. The price paid for intellectual pacification is the sacrifice of the entire moral courage of the human mind. The spirit of improvement is not always a spirit of liberty, for it may aim at forcing improvements on an unwilling people. In this age, the man who dares to think for himself and to act independently does a service to his race. Truth gains more even by the errors of one who, with due study and preparation, thinks for himself, than by the true opinions of those who only hold them because they do not suffer themselves to think. What distinguishes the majority of men from the few is their inability to act according to their beliefs. He who lets the world choose his plan of life for him has need of no other faculty than that of ape-like imitation. He who does anything because it is the custom makes no choice. A state which dwarfs its men, in order that they may be more docile instruments in its hands even for beneficial purposes, will find that with small men no great thing can really be accomplished. Ask yourself whether you are happy, and you cease to be so. There is the greatest difference between presuming an opinion to be true, because, with every opportunity for contesting it, it has not been refuted, and assuming its truth for the purpose of not permitting its refutation. All attempts by the state to bias the conclusions of its citizens on disputed subjects are evil. Life has a certain flavor for those who have fought and risked all that the sheltered and protected can never experience. A profound conviction raises a man above the feeling of ridicule. Language is the light of the mind. A person should be free to do as he likes in his own concerns, but he ought not to be free to do as he likes in acting for another, under the pretext that the affairs of the other are his own affairs. As often as a study is cultivated by narrow minds, they will draw from it narrow conclusions. Pleasure and freedom from pain are the only things desirable as ends. In proportion to the development of his individuality, each person becomes more valuable to himself and is therefore capable of being more valuable to others. Next to selfishness, the principal cause which makes life unsatisfactory is want of mental cultivation. Everyone who receives the protection of society owes a return for the benefit. Stupidity is much the same all the world over. The individual is not accountable to society for his actions in so far as these concern the interests of no person but himself. My father taught me that the question, "Who made me?" cannot be answered, since it immediately suggests the further question, "Who made God?" Photography is a brief complicity between foresight and luck. The fatal tendency of mankind to leave off thinking about a thing when it is no longer doubtful is the cause of half their errors. We have a right, also, in various ways, to act upon our unfavorable opinion of anyone, not to the oppression of his individuality, but in the exercise of ours. Liberty consists in doing what one desires. It is better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Persons of genius, it is true, are, and are always likely to be, a small minority, but in order to have them, it is necessary to preserve the soil in which they grow. The study of science teaches young men to think, while study of the classics teaches them to express thought. Actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. By happiness is intended pleasure and the absence of pain. No slave is a slave to the same lengths, and in so full a sense of the word, as a wife is. There is one plain rule of life: try thyself unweariedly till thou findest the highest thing thou art capable of doing, faculties and outward circumstances being both duly considered, and then do it. The despotism of custom is everywhere the standing hindrance to human advancement. To mistake money for wealth is the same sort of error as to mistake the highway, which may be the easiest way of getting to your house or lands, for the house and lands themselves. A great statesman is he who knows when to depart from traditions, as well as when to adhere to them. The best state for human nature is that in which, while no one is poor, no one desires to be richer, nor has any reason to fear from thrust back by the efforts of others to push themselves forward. Men are men before they are lawyers, or physicians, or merchants, or manufacturers, and if you make them capable and sensible men, they will make themselves capable and sensible lawyers or physicians. Every man who says frankly and fully what he thinks is so far doing a public service, we should be grateful to him for attacking most unsparingly our most cherished opinions. Each undervalues that part of the materials of thought with which he is not familiar. The principles which men profess on any controverted subject are usually a very incomplete exponent of the opinions they really hold. Among a people without fellow feeling, especially if they read and speak different languages, the united public opinion necessary to the working of the representative government cannot exist. No one can be a great thinker who does not recognize that as a thinker it is his first duty to follow his intellect to whatever conclusions it may lead. The reasons for legal intervention in favor of children apply not less strongly to the case of those unfortunate slaves and victims of the most brutal part of mankind, the lower animals. In this age, the mere example of nonconformity, the mere refusal to bend the knee to custom, is itself a service. We can never be sure that the opinion we are endeavoring to stifle is a false opinion, and if we were sure, stifling it would be an evil still. Whatever helps to shape the human being, to make the individual what he is, or hinder him from being what he is not, is part of his education. All political revolutions not affected by foreign conquest originate in moral revolutions. The subversion of established institutions is merely one consequence of the previous subversion of established opinions. Since the general or prevailing opinion on any subject is rarely or never the whole truth, it is only by the collision of adverse opinion that the remainder of the truth has any chance of being supplied. The disease which inflicts bureaucracy and what they usually die from is routine. But society has now fairly got the better of individuality, and the danger which threatens human nature is not the excess, but the deficiency of personal impulses and preferences. The amount of eccentricity in a society has generally been proportional to the amount of genius, mental vigor, and moral courage it contained. That so few now dare to be eccentric marks the chief danger of the time. It would not be easy even for an unbeliever to find a better translation of the rule of virtue from the abstract into the concrete than to endeavor so to live that Christ would approve our life. All errors which a man is likely to commit against advice are far outweighed by the evil of allowing others to constrain him for his good. Solitude in the presence of natural beauty and grandeur is the cradle of thought and aspirations which are not only good for the individual, but which society can ill do without. The only power deserving the name is that of masses and of governments, while they make themselves the organ of the tendencies and instincts of masses. Over one's mind and over one's body, the individual is sovereign. The besetting danger is not so much of embracing falsehood for truth as of mistaking a part of the truth for the whole. All acts suppose certain dispositions and habits of mind and heart, which may be in themselves states of enjoyment or of wretchedness, and which must be fruitful in other consequences besides those particular acts. It is questionable if all the mechanical inventions yet made have lightened the day's toil of any human being. The great majority of those who speak of perfectibility as a dream do so because they feel that it is one which would afford them no pleasure if it were realized. It is historically true that a large proportion of infidels in all ages have been persons of distinguished integrity and honor. Customs are made for customary circumstances and customary characters. The demand for commodities is not the demand for labor. Art is the employment of the powers of nature for an end. The idea is essentially repulsive of a society held together only by the relations and feelings arising out of pecuniary interest. Strong impulses are but another name for energy. Energy may be turned to bad uses, but more good may always be made of an energetic nature than of an indolent and impassive one. There is a tolerably general agreement about what a university is not. It is not a place of professional education. When the people are too much attached to savage independence to be tolerant of the amount of power to which it is for their good that they should be subject, the state of society is not yet ripe for representative government. The human faculties of perception, judgment, discriminative feeling, mental activity, and even moral preference are exercised only in making a choice. He who does anything because it is the custom makes no choice. The world would be astonished if it knew how great a proportion of its brightest ornaments, of those distinguished even in popular estimation for wisdom and virtue, are complete skeptics in religion. I did not mean that conservatives are generally stupid. I meant that stupid persons are generally conservative. I believe that to be so obvious and undeniable a fact that I hardly think any gentleman will question it. The principle itself of dogmatic religion, dogmatic morality, dogmatic philosophy, is what requires to be booted out, not any particular manifestation of that principle. The concessions of the privileged to the unprivileged are seldom brought about by any better motive than the power of the unprivileged to extort them. Whatever crushes individuality is despotism, by whatever name it may be called, and whether it professes to be enforcing the will of God or the injunctions of men. To say that secular means irreligious implies that all the arts and sciences are irreligious, and is very like saying that all professions except that of the law are illegal. A party of order or stability and a party of progress or reform are both necessary elements of a healthy state of political life. Strange it is that men should admit the validity of the arguments for free speech, but object to their being pushed to an extreme, not seeing that unless the reasons are good for an extreme case, they are not good for any case. The real advantage which truth has consists in this, that when an opinion is true, it may be extinguished once, twice, or many times, but in the course of ages there will generally be found persons to rediscover it. A general state education is a mere contrivance for molding people to be exactly like one another, and as the mold in which it casts them is that which pleases the dominant power in the government, so long as an opinion is strongly rooted in the feelings, it gains rather than loses in stability by having a preponderating weight of argument against it. It is only in the backward countries of the world that increased production is still an important object. The strongest of all arguments against the interference of the public with purely personal conduct is that when it does interfere, the odds are that it interferes wrongly and in the wrong place. Men might as well be imprisoned as excluded from the means of earning their bread. Truth emerges from the clash of adverse ideas. I will call no being good who is not what I mean when I apply that epithet to my fellow creatures, and if such a creature can sentence me to hell for not so calling him, to hell I will go. Human beings are no longer born to their place in life ... but are free to employ their faculties and such favorable chances as offer to achieve the lot which may appear to them as desirable. Marriage is the only actual bondage known to our law. There remain no legal slaves except the mistress of every house. I am not aware that any community has a right to force another to be civilized. Popular opinions on subjects not palpable to sense are often true, but seldom or never the whole truth. The dictum that truth always triumphs over persecution is one of the pleasant falsehoods which men repeat after one another till they pass into commonplaces, but which all experience refutes. Ask yourself whether you are happy and you cease to be so. The only chance is to treat not happiness, but some end external to it, as the purpose of life. All that makes existence valuable to anyone depends on the enforcement of restraints upon the actions of other people. A cultivated mind is one to which the fountains of knowledge have been opened, and which has been taught, in any tolerable degree, to exercise its faculties. In its narrowest acceptation, order means obedience. A government is said to preserve order if it succeeds in getting itself obeyed. Despotism is a legitimate mode of government in dealing with barbarians, provided the end be their improvement. I have observed that not the man who hopes when others despair, but the man who despairs when others hope, is admired by a large class of persons as a sage. Both teachers and learners go to sleep at their post as soon as there is no enemy in the field. The ne plus ultra of wickedness is embodied in what is commonly presented to mankind as the creed of Christianity. Mankind are greater gainers by suffering each other to live as seems good to themselves than by compelling each to live as seems good to the rest. Everyone is degraded, whether aware of it or not, when other people, without consulting him, take upon themselves unlimited power to regulate his destiny. The philosophy of reasoning, to be complete, ought to comprise the theory of bad as well as of good reasoning. Everything must be free to be written and published without restraint. Men and governments must act to the best of their ability. There is no such thing as absolute certainty, but there is assurance sufficient for the purposes of human life. That so few now dare to be eccentric marks the chief danger of the time. Almost all rich veins of original and striking speculation have been opened by systematic half-thinkers. Among the works of man, which human life is rightly employed in perfecting, the first in importance surely is man himself, Of two pleasures, if there be one which all or almost all who have experience of both give a decided preference, irrespective of any feeling of moral obligation to prefer it, that is the more desirable pleasure. So long as we do not harm others, we should be free to think, speak, act, and live as we see fit, without molestation from individuals, law, or govt. So true is that unnatural generally means only uncustomary, and that everything which is usual appears natural. Was there ever any domination that did not appear natural to those who possessed it? The guesses which serve to give mental unity and wholeness to a chaos of scattered particulars are accidents which rarely occur to any minds but those abounding in knowledge and disciplined in intellectual combinations. Education is one of the subjects which most essentially require to be considered by various minds and from a variety of points of view, for, of all many-sided subjects, it is the one which has the greatest number of sides. A population may be too crowded. Though all be amply supplied with food and raiment, it is not good for a man to be kept perforce at all times in the presence of his species. All free communities have both been more exempt from social injustice and crime, and have attained more brilliant prosperity than any others, or than they themselves after they have lost their freedom. It is as certain that many opinions, now general, will be rejected by future ages, as it is that many, once general, are rejected by the present. The habit of analysis has a tendency to wear away the feelings. There is no one-size-fits-all way to build an audience. It is conceivable that religion may be morally useful without being intellectually sustainable. Among the facts of the universe to be accounted for, it may be said, is mind, and it is self-evident that nothing can have produced mind but mind. I had learnt from experience that many false opinions may be exchanged for true ones, without in the least altering the habits of mind of which false opinions are made. The peculiarity of the evidence of mathematical truths is that all the argument is on one side. There ought to exist the fullest liberty of professing and discussing, as a matter of ethical conviction, any doctrine, however immoral it may be considered. A person's taste is as much his own peculiar concern as his opinion or his purse. If any opinion is compelled to silence, that opinion may, for aught we can certainly know, be true. To deny this is to assume our own infallibility. Judgment is given to men that they may use it, because it may be used erroneously. Are men to be told that they ought not to use it at all? Mechanizing man's work had changed but not lighted his toil. It is a law that every event depends on some law. The sole evidence it is possible to produce that anything is desirable is that people do actually desire it. Is there any moral enormity which might not be justified by imitation of such a deity? As long as justice and injustice have not terminated their ever-renewing fight for ascendancy in the affairs of mankind, human beings must be willing, when need is, to do battle for the one against the other. The most important thing women have to do is to stir up the zeal of women themselves. In the human mind, one-sidedness has always been the rule, and many-sidedness the exception. Hence, even in revolutions of opinion, one part of the truth usually sets, while another rises. It is given to no human being to stereotype a set of truths, and walk safely by their guidance with his mind's eye closed. They who know how to employ opportunities will often find that they can create them, and what we can achieve depends less on the amount of time we possess than on the use we make of our time. Instead of the function of governing, for which it is radically unfit, the proper office of a representative assembly is to watch and control. The government. My father never permitted anything which I learnt to degenerate into a mere exercise of memory. He strove to make the understanding not only go along with every step of the teaching, but precede it. Laws and systems of polity always begin by recognizing the relations they find already existing between individuals. Complete liberty of contradicting and disproving our opinion is the very condition which justifies us in assuming its truth for purposes of action. The great creative individual is capable of more wisdom and virtue than collective man ever can be. If opponents of all important truths do not exist, it is indispensable to imagine them and supply them with the strongest arguments which the most skillful devil's advocate can conjure up. Miracles have no claim whatever to the character of historical facts and are wholly invalid as evidence of any revelation. As for charity, it is a matter in which the immediate effect on the persons directly concerned and the ultimate consequence to the general good are apt to be at complete war with one another. What is contrary to women's nature to do, they never will be made to do by simply giving their nature free play. The average condition of the people improving or deteriorating depends upon whether population is advancing faster than improvement or improvement than population. All desirable things are desirable either for the pleasure inherent in themselves or as a means to the promotion of pleasure and the prevention of pain. There are no means of finding what either one person or many can do, but by trying, and no means by which anyone else can discover for them what it is for their happiness to do or leave undone. The feeling of a direct responsibility of the individual to God is almost wholly a creation of Protestantism. Induction is a process of inference. It proceeds from the known to the unknown. The despotism of custom is on the wane. We are not content to know that things are. We ask whether they ought to be. When the land is cultivated entirely by the spade and no horses are kept, a cow is kept for every 3 acres of land. All the good of which humanity is capable is comprised in obedience. The test of real and vigorous thinking, the thinking which ascertains truths instead of dreaming dreams, is successful application to practice. Money is a machine for doing quickly and commodiously what would be done, though less quickly and commodiously, without it. Trade is a social act. Every established fact which is too bad to admit of any other defense is always presented to us as an injunction of religion. It might be plausibly maintained that in almost every one of the leading controversies, past or present, in social philosophy, both sides were in the right in what they affirmed, though wrong in what they denied. Men do not want solely the obedience of women. They want their sentiments. So natural to mankind is intolerance that religious freedom has hardly anywhere been practically realized. All action is for the sake of some end, and rules of action, it seems natural to suppose, must take their whole character and color from the end to which they are subservient. A stationary condition of capital and population implies no stationary state of human improvement. There could be as much scope as ever for all kinds of mental culture and moral and social progress. If the universe had a beginning, its beginning, by the very condition of the cases, was supernatural. The laws of nature cannot account for their own origin. There is a very real evil consequent on ascribing supernatural origin to the received maxims of morality. That origin consecrates the whole of them and protects them from being discussed or criticized. The duty of man is the same in respect to his own nature as in respect to the nature of all other things, namely not to follow it but to amend it. I well knew that to propose something which would be called extreme was the true way not to impede but to facilitate a more moderate experiment. To do as one would be done by, and to love one's neighbor as oneself, constitute the ideal perfection of utilitarian morality. Seeming contentment is real discontent, combined with indolence or self-indulgence, which, while taking no legitimate means of raising itself, delights in bringing others down to its own level. It appears, then, to be a condition of a genuinely scientific hypothesis that it be not destined always to remain an hypothesis, but be certain to be either proved or disproved by comparison with observed facts. Political economy as a branch of science is extremely modern, but the subject with which its inquiries are conversant has in all ages necessarily constituted one of the chief practical interests of mankind. What citizens of a free country would listen to any offers of good and skillful administration in return for the abdication of freedom? The bad workmen who form the majority of the operatives in many branches of industry are decidedly of opinion that bad workmen ought to receive the same wages as good. Any society which is not improving is deteriorating, and the more so the closer and more familiar it is. Even a really superior man almost always begins to deteriorate when he is habitually king of his company. That a thing is peculiar is no argument for its being blamable, since the most criminal actions are to a being like man not more unnatural than most of the virtues. The beliefs which we have most warrant for have no safeguard to rest on, but a standing invitation to the whole world to prove them unfounded. Any participation, even in the smallest public function, is useful. Every opinion which embodies somewhat of the portion of truth which the common opinion omits ought to be considered precious, with whatever amount of error and confusion that truth may be blended. Which quote did you like the most? Share your opinion in the comments. Don't miss out on a chance to see the next video. Subscribe.